It's now my immense pleasure to introduce our next guest, Juliet Jacques, who is a freelance author best known for writing the Transgender Journey series for the Guardian website, which was longlisted for the Orwell Prize in 2011. Juliet's short fiction, journalism and essays have also appeared in Granta, the New Statements, London Review of Books, Time Out, The New Humanist, New Inquiry, Film Waves, 3 AM, and many more. Juliet's memoir, entitled Trans, has just been published and is a wonderful journey through gender, where Jacques has carved out a space through writing. We'd also like to emphasize Juliet Jacques' participation in yesterday's Flash Marathon. For those of you who want to know more, you can see this online. It was on Google Hangout and is now archived online. And was Juliet alongside Etel Adnan and Gilbert and George discussing the topic of this year's marathon, transformation. Juliet will be giving a performance lecture of a fictional story entitled Before and After. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Juliet Jacques.
Thank you, Hans Ulrich. Actually, the fictional lecture didn't quite come together, so this is a statement of fact, everything I'm going to say to you now. And it begins with me at the age of about 14, 15 in my hometown of Hawley in Surrey, where I was questioning my gender without any access to like-minded people or any information in school or local libraries. So, and that was due to a piece of conservative legislation, Section 28. So I used to scour the TV listings and newspapers, desperate to find anyone with the same issues and learn how they handled them. I preferred films and documentaries, but also read articles that tried to explain transsexual lives. I kept seeing the same stories, people who said they always knew that they were born in the wrong body and had to choose between being themselves and the risk of family and friends disowning them, and I soon bored of them. One thing, however, struck me every time, the before and after photographs. I remember one article in a women's magazine about someone who was born a man. I didn't question this phrase. I was too dazzled by the photographs of a person reclining, her palm resting where her forehead met her long blonde hair. Now I'm a beautiful woman, screamed the headline. In her pre-transitional past, the woman looked like a boy. Now she could have been a model. I didn't care. Although I knew I wanted to be a woman, I had little interest in fashion, so I only skimmed the text. In the Sunday People, I saw an advert for a company called Transformation. From he to she, instantly, it promised, above photos of a stubbly, balding man and a glamorous woman in heavy makeup, long wig and pretty dress. I was sceptical about what they sold to stop facial hair growth or develop a bust, thinking that this would require more than putting some cream on my face or stuffing something inside a bra. But while the feature in the women's magazine had seemed from another world, this advert made me feel that transition might be possible, even if I didn't yet know how. The adult me can see that before and after photographs have the effect of masking processes of change, even as they ostensibly reveal them. I still see it in the same tabloids that my parents got, as well as on websites that cover pop culture, frequently in an attempt to undermine someone's identity, but in sympathetic articles as well. Recently, its shortcomings were exposed when people already in the public eye, such as Alexis Arquette, Lana Wachowski, or Chaz Bono, came out as transsexual. When used in stories about unfamiliar people, these images are sensationalist, usually picking out the most typically masculine and feminine pictures for maximum effect. But in particular with Arquette, who'd played so many film roles, there was no point in trying to pretend that she had changed overnight, and instead, media outlets studied old images for gradual movement and to see which signs they'd missed. Before and after pictures had been part of print coverage of transsexuality from the start. In January 1937, less than a decade after the earliest sex reassignment surgeries in Berlin, American bodybuilding magazine Physical Culture ran one of the first articles on the subject, entitled, "Can Sex in Humans Be Changed?" Its opening paragraph was relaxed about the possibility of radical social change, suggesting that the old landmarks are going, nothing is static, everything flows, life is created in the laboratory, and sex is no longer immutable. The writer, Donald Firthman Wickets, went on to look at historical ideas of male and female and the role of hormones in determining them. There were 2 shots of Britain's first surgically transsexual man, Mark Weston. One in a white shirt, tie and tank top with Alberta Bray, quote, a former girl chum to who he is now married, and the other as Great Britain's girl javelin champion during the 1920s, the only clear difference being that he'd grown stubble. There was also an image of Zdeněk Kubkov of Czechoslovakia, who had won the women's 100 metres at the 1932 Olympic Games as Zdeněka Kubkova, but had since transitioned, shown wearing a suit and lifting his hat to show off his closely cropped hair. The pronouns he and him were used throughout. Despite its scientific tone, the piece offered little sense of what happened physically. Readers were told no more than that, in both cases, the miracle was accomplished by surgery and Juliet knowledge by law. It was only after the Second World War, as photographs on newspaper covers became common, that transsexuality developed into a mass media phenomenon. On the 1st of December, 1952, the New York Daily Times ran the story of Christine Jorgensen under the headline, "XGI Becomes Blonde Beauty," with contrasting images of her as a soldier and as a glamorous woman. Instantly, Jorgensen became famous worldwide, working as an actress, singer, and transgender rights advocate. In her 2008 book, Transgender History, Susan Stryker writes about how the fascination with Jorgensen had to do with the mid-20th century awe for scientific technology, which now could not only split atoms, but could also, apparently, turn a man into a woman. Stryker notes that Jorgensen was the first American transsexual woman to become prominent after the war gave the US a new geopolitical importance and changed women's relationships with paid labour and domestic work. Now, it wasn't just gender roles that were in flux, but sex and gender themselves. What would happen if men could become women and vice versa? As it transpired, the transsexual phenomenon, as Dr. Harry Benjamin called it in his influential book of 1967, did not destroy American society. And looking at the photographs of Jorgensen now, they don't really justify their attention-grabbing subheading, Operations Transform Bronx Youth. Jorgensen's facial structure barely altered between 1943 and 1952. Her hairline, eyes, nose, lips, and chin looked the same, with the main differences being in clothing and makeup. Despite their contrasting styles, both Physical Culture and the New York Daily Times tried to show radical discontinuity between male and female, emphasizing the otherworldliness of those crossing them. At the same time, sexologists, feminists, and gender theorists were looking at the spaces between these categories, suggesting that behavioural expectations for men and women were mostly socially generated. By the late 1980s, Sandy Stone's Empire Strikes Back, a post-transsexual manifesto, was calling for transsexual people to be open about the area between male and female and how they moved within it, positions that before and after pictures had to keep hidden to retain their power to humiliate and shock. In March 2009, I began the process of gender reassignment. Having talked and read about it so much, I hadn't expected the rapid transformations I'd seen promised in my youth, and I wasn't surprised when I was told it would take about 3 years, partly due to waiting times for specialist services. Nor was I shocked to hear that the physical changes would not transform me beyond quick recognisability. Instead, they form part of a longer psychological process. Altering my body in a society with entrenched ideas about how men and women should appear and be treated meant rethinking how I dressed, spoke, and moved, and how I felt about myself. As I waited for my first gender identity clinic appointment, an old friend, documentary filmmaker Lindsay Dryden, urged me to keep a video diary whenever I encountered a transitional milestone. Since I've never liked being photographed or filmed, this was superseded by the Transgender Journey blog that I pitched to The Guardian, hoping to create something between those one-off transition narrative articles and transsexual memoirs, for years the only way in which people could explain what had happened to them at any meaningful length. April Ashley's Odyssey, published in 1982, described Ashley's voyage from post-depression Liverpool to national fame via spells in the Navy and as a performer in a Parisian cabaret, surgery in Casablanca, an acting and modelling career hampered by tabloid revelations, and a marriage to Lord Arthur Corbett that was annulled when a court refused to recognise her gender. That Ashley's beauty came with a transsexual history was central to her celebrity, and her Odyssey featured several photographs of her as a boy. Within her story, however, the visual path from George Jameson, aged 15 at school, to Tony April, aged 21, and finally April Ashley in the early 60s, appeared smooth and logical. The other best-known British memoir, Conundrum, published by Jan Morris in 1974, who was established as a travel writer long before her transition, used no images at all, which was an approach I preferred. My editors at The Guardian never demanded a byline photo, keeping the focus on my text. Aiming to expose the lie behind the before and after techniques implied instantaneity, I wanted to cover the process in real time, but it was too slow. Waits between appointments lasted months, the hormone prescription took over a year to arrive, and their effects were gradual. Even allowing for the fact that the series began a year after I entered the medical pathway, I'd said all I wanted to about the social and psychological aspects of transition long before I got a date for surgery. One thing I found hard to chronicle was the effect that this all had on my sense of self as a continuous subject. For a long time, changing my name felt like the major rupture. Having people refer to me differently seemed far more sudden than anything that later happened to my body. The hormonal effects were too slow and subtle for me to see, so I'd ask friends to explain when they said I looked different, and the responses usually matched my expectations. Thicker hair, softer skin, and fuller cheeks. After a year despairing at how little impact the estrogen seemed to have made, I undressed in front of a mirror, and I was astonished by my own appearance. Even without makeup, my face suddenly looked more female than before, and I realised that nobody on the street had heckled me for being transsexual in months. Moreover, I developed a chest, smaller than the inserts I'd bought in 2009, but an important and visible change nonetheless. Then I looked at Becoming, a flickbook by the Berlin-based artist Juliet Jacques. She regularly photographed herself as a standing nude after starting reassignment, installing 28 images as a zoetrope in the 2010 Busan Biennale, and choosing 87 of 911 pictures for her flipbook. Each picture was taken before a white backdrop, without makeup, emphasising the incremental changes. In this context, even her sex reassignment surgery in 2008 did not appear incongruous, but assimilated into the physical landscape that she presented. Like me, Juliet had struggled to take control of the before and after conceit and expose the potentially limitless terrain invisibly contained within it. This took me back to a photograph of myself from 2004, which I stumbled across online. I was in Manchester with my friends Joe Stretch and Joe Cross from the band Performance, wearing a 1920s-style dress with a headscarf over my hair and makeup hiding my skin texture. It closed the psychological gap between my pre- and post-transitional self, highlighting the continuum between the various identities I'd grown into while exploring my gender. I could easily have faked transsexual before and after pictures back then, editing out the fact that at that time I presented mostly as male while I thought about what was the right thing for me to do with my body. 15 months after surgery, and finally feeling like someone who had transitioned more than like someone who was transsexual, I told musician and makeup artist Emily Forst that I hated being photographed, possibly a hangover from the negative self-image attached to presenting as a man for so long. She gave me a makeover, styled my hair, and took a portrait that made me feel like the person I wanted to be for the first time since 2004. But comparing the two photographs, the main differences I see are in my expression. My cautious optimism as a 22-year-old against the melancholy in my 30-something eyes after 5 years of street harassment, anxiety about how my loved ones would react to my transition, the physical pain of surgery, and the responsibilities that came with writing about it all on a big platform, as well as the numerous interactions with people who've been through similar situations and often been damaged by them. I doubt that anyone who just saw before and after pictures of me would be able to recognise much of this, but they would probably be better placed to tell me how my features had changed. Really, though, that's always struck me as the least interesting thing about all of this, and after everything that's happened, it still does. Thank you.